This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm sitting here today on the patio at Hillebrand with winemaker Craig McDonald. How are you today, sir?
Very well, thanks, Jamie. Always a pleasure, mate.
Now, you came on board with Hillebrand just over a year ago, am I correct?
1 year today, on the 26th of July. So cheers.
Really?
Yeah, it's my anniversary.
Cheers.
So.
Yep. And I can remember I was judging with you at Interview, and you were just making that transition, moving here from Creekside. What have you learned about growing grapes in Niagara and making wine in Niagara since joining Hillebrand?
Yeah, well, we have a lot more grapes at Hillebrand. It's a big company. Actually, when I met you, we were judging, and if you recall, I was running in and out of the judging with my blackberry because it was sparkling.
Before coming to Hillebrand, did you have much experience making sparkling wines?
Not a whole lot, no, to be honest. I'd worked in the cellars with a few wineries that had done it before, but never with such a great program like this. I mean, excuse me for 1 minute. Just had to do that. Yeah, never with such a dramatic program that we have here. That 500,000 bottles of sparkling wine, traditional method. I mean, it's one of my favourite sparklings. Long before I came to Ontario or to Hillebrand was this particular wine. We don't cut any corners with this one. It's all hand-picked, whole bunch pressed. It's a non-vintage, so we have an incredible mother blend that's goes back 5 years. So we've got great complexity to start with in the base blend. It's then tirage downstairs here, where you can see behind you in individual caves for up to 18 months. Then the dosage. It's pretty dry. We like to let the base wine express itself. The autolysis come through, and yeah, like I mentioned, it was just one of those wines that I've always appreciated. When I came to Ontario, and happy to be the guy that's kind of the steward of this great program. Cheers.
Cheers.
And I guess just the general breadth of vineyards that we have, is huge. It's nearly a third of the grapes in Ontario come through the door here, and also at the other wineries. So just getting my hands around the whole thing, and understanding the vineyards, the different soils, the different growers, what's where, was the huge challenge that I had. But I've gone around the carousel once, so it'll be a lot easier the second time, mate. I'm pretty sure. But it was a lot of work. Great vintage. I mean, what a vintage to start though, 2010.
Now, would that be for both whites and reds?
Yeah, that was the cool thing about 2010. Like the grass was green all summer, timely rainfall, not a lot of stress, which sometimes in a warm year you find that the whites don't always handle that, that drought stress, especially Riesling. But no, we seem to get full ripeness in the reds, and the whites still retain that freshness and that elegance that you don't often see in a warm year. So across the board, pretty damn good. Yeah.
From where in Ontario do you get that wonderful accent?
From the Ottawa Valley. No, I'm just kidding, mate. No, from Australia, born and bred, Northern Victoria.
Northern Victoria.
Yeah, right at the junction of South Australia and New South Wales.
And that is where you studied in winemaking?
Well, actually, I didn't really study in winemaking per se, but I got a job in Lindemann's winery in 1993, and it's a bit like, Stelco and DeFasco in Hamilton. I mean, Lindemann's is the biggest winery in the Southern Hemisphere, and it employs over half the town that I grew up in.
Oh.
So, by virtue of growing up in that vineyard area, I was working in vineyards as a kid, and then working in the winery later on. Kind of got sucked into it, if you will. Met a lot of winemakers and people from around the world, and not only understood the wine, but the culture of food and wine. And I was at a party till the wee hours of the morning, and remember, a German guy, a French winemaker, an American winemaker, and they're all cooking their own types of food, bringing their own wines there, and I just thought, I've got to get into this. This is pretty cool. So it was kind of a cultural sidestep away from being an Aussie in the country, and looking at just how dynamic and diverse people were in this industry. I love it. I mean, that's why I did it. That's why I do it.
Was wine a part of your life when you were growing up, when you were a young fellow in Australia?
It was, yeah. I mean, my parents always drank wine in a 4-litre cask. I mean, we drank wine all the time, but it was a cultural thing. We had wine in the fridge and wine on the counter.
Right.
I grew up in a wine region, but I wouldn't say I was terribly engrossed in the culture of wine all the way through. It was more beer,
yes,
and spirits. But it wasn't until I started working in the industry that I kind of broadened my perception of it. But yeah, I grew up in a pretty rural area that, there's citrus, grapes, wheat, and sheep.
Right.
And that's about it. And desert.
And may I ask what brought you to Canada? What was it the world of wine that brought you here, or something else?
What the Aussies call a good old Sheila called me here, actually. I was working in Oregon at the time, a small producer there making Pinot and Chardonnay, and then finished up there, shot through over to Scotland, actually.
Really?
As a matter of fact, yeah. Met a Canadian backpacker, and as you do, you hook up, and a few pints and a few drams later, I was on a plane following her back to Toronto. And I was going back to Oregon, and we kept in touch, and she basically said to me, come back for Christmas, you haven't really seen Toronto, and we've actually got a wine region here as well.
Now, were you aware that wines were being made in Niagara at that point?
Yeah, I was, but it was more, ice wine, of course.
Yes.
And I'd heard that the aromatic whites were pretty good, but that was about it. And I had no idea of how big the industry was, whether it was cottage. I didn't understand. There were places like Hillebrand that were 30 years old, or Andrew Pello, 50 years in the business. So I just had no idea how deep it was, and basically trotted down here one weekend and fell in love with it, and was just blown away by the Riesling and Chardonnay, and actually the Gamay was pretty good as well.
Can you still remember those wines that you tasted upon that first excursion into wine country in Niagara?
I can actually. It was a 1993 Riesling Reserve from Cave Springs. Was one of the first ones I had. Also, it was a 2005 Indian Summer Riesling.
Also from Cave Springs.
Also from Cave Springs. And I thought it was an amazing wine, which it still is, a fantastic wine. I also had some Marinison Reds. I can't remember exactly which one. A Lakeview Red that I thought was pretty stunning. And a Henry of Pelham Riesling as well. So it was more on that bench side that I really discovered wine. Again, not knowing that it was even on the other side of the canal at that point. And it was there that I kind of decided I'd have a crack at it, and I worked for Glenn and Angelo for a couple of seasons there at Cave Springs.
I wasn't aware that you worked at Cave Springs. That's something I never knew.
Oh yeah. No, I kind of took a bite out of there, out of that big apple, and just sort of said I got to stay here and learn a little bit, and then kept bouncing around back and forward, down to Australia, New Zealand, back to Canada, back to the States, and then it wasn't until 2000 that I dropped the anchor and basically jumped on board with Creekside.
Craig, you've already told us about your very first experience of Riesling, Canadian Riesling at Cave Spring. Can you recall your very first Canadian red wine?
Actually, a good point. We always think about Canada and white wine, but my very first red wine was way back in the 90s, and it was a 95 Trius, believe it or not. Kind of come full circle, if you will, but yeah, it was an incredible wine that I do remember. Great vintage, and it's still one that we make today, obviously, but it was, I think that along with the Marinison and Lakeview Reds that I remember from the 95 vintage, which really got my attention. We don't always do reds as consistently perhaps as we've done whites in the past, way back then, but I think things are changing. But that was definitely a wine that I enjoyed and got my attention, and actually shared very recently with JL when he was here for lunch the other day, so it was an incredible experience. Still some life in that wine, surprisingly.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today for Food Revolution.
Awesome, mate. Thanks for coming, bud.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Okay, cheers.
Yeah.